April 30th, 1945. Adolf Hitler supposedly died in a bunker beneath Berlin, but his body was never properly found. The FBI investigated his escape for years, and declassified documents reveal something shocking. What if history's greatest monster didn't actually die that day? I'm Amelia, and welcome to Redline USA, where we investigate the mysteries they don't teach you in history class. Today, we're diving into one of the most controversial questions of the 20th century. What really happened to Adolf Hitler? For nearly 80 years, historians, investigators, and conspiracy theorists have debated this question. The official story says he committed suicide, but the evidence, well, it's complicated. The Soviets kept secrets, the FBI chased leads across continents, and to this day, some people believe Hitler escaped to live out his days in secret. So let's examine the evidence, all of it. The official story, the conspiracy theories, and the shocking truth that modern forensics has finally revealed. To understand what happened, we need to go back to Berlin in April 1945. The city was in ruins. The Soviet Red Army was closing in from all sides. The Third Reich, which Hitler had promised would last 1,000 years, was collapsing after just 12. Hitler had retreated to his underground bunker, the Führerbunker, a concrete fortress buried 8 meters beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden. This would be his tomb. Or would it? Inside that bunker, the atmosphere was apocalyptic. Hitler was a broken man. He had Parkinson's disease. His left hand trembled uncontrollably, and he was taking up to 28 different drugs daily. His military commanders were defying his orders. His allies had abandoned him, and his dream of a 1,000-year Reich was dying in the streets above. On April 29, 1945, with Soviet troops just blocks away, Hitler did something unexpected. He married his longtime companion, Eva Braun, in a brief civil ceremony. It was a strange moment of normalcy in the midst of total chaos. That same day, he dictated his final will and political testament. In it, he blamed everyone but himself for Germany's defeat: the Jews, the generals, the German people themselves for being too weak. And then he made his final decision. According to the official account, Hitler and Eva Braun retreated to their private quarters in the bunker. Outside the door, Hitler's staff waited nervously. Then, a gunshot. When Hitler's valet, Heinz Linge, and SS adjutant Otto Günsche entered the room, they found Hitler slumped on a sofa, blood dripping from a gunshot wound to his right temple. A Walther PPK pistol lay at his feet. Next to him, Eva Braun had also died, from cyanide poisoning. She hadn't even fired a shot. Hitler had given explicit orders. Their bodies must be taken outside, doused in gasoline, and burned. He had seen what happened to Mussolini's corpse just days earlier, displayed, mutilated, hung upside down in a public square. Hitler was determined to avoid that fate. So that's what they did. Wrapped in blankets, the bodies were carried up the bunker stairs, placed in a shallow crater in the Reich Chancellery Garden, covered in 200 liters of gasoline, and set ablaze. As Soviet artillery shells exploded around them, Hitler's staff gave one final Nazi salute and watched their Führer burn. At least, that's what we were told. Before we go any further into this investigation, if you're the kind of person who wants to know the real story behind history's greatest mysteries, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now for Redline USA. We're diving deep into the stories they don't want you to know. And make sure you click the bell icon, because what we uncover next about Hitler's death will challenge everything you thought you knew. Now, let's talk about what the Soviets found when they stormed that bunker. So who was actually there? Who witnessed Hitler's final moments? This is where the story starts to get interesting, because the testimonies don't all line up perfectly. The key witnesses were Heinz Linge, Hitler's personal valet, Otto Günsche, his SS adjutant, Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary, Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, and several others in the bunker complex. Here's what they agreed on. Hitler shot himself. Eva took cyanide. The bodies were burned. But here's what they disagreed on. The exact time. The exact method. Who actually saw the bodies first? And critically, how completely the bodies were destroyed. Heinz Linge testified that when he entered the room, he immediately smelled bitter almonds, the telltale scent of cyanide. This led some to believe Hitler didn't shoot himself at all, but took cyanide like Eva. Others said he did both, bit down on a cyanide capsule and pulled the trigger simultaneously. Otto Gunsche claimed the bodies burned for hours, but others said the flames were extinguished after just 30 minutes because of the shelling. So which is it? Were the bodies completely cremated, or were they still identifiable? This confusion, these small contradictions, would fuel decades of conspiracy theories. But it also created an opening for the Soviets to control the narrative. May 2nd, 1945. Soviet troops from the 3rd Shock Army storm the Reich Chancellery. They fight their way through the rubble and descend into the Führerbunker complex. What they find is empty. Hitler and his inner circle are already dead or fled. But in that bomb-cratered garden, Soviet intelligence officer Ivan Klemenko makes a discovery. In a shell crater, partially buried, he finds what appear to be 2 badly burned bodies. One male, one female. The bodies are taken away in secret. No photographs are released. No public announcement is made. Instead, Soviet pathologists conduct a covert autopsy on May 8, 1945, the day Germany officially surrendered. Here's what that autopsy revealed. The male body had extensive damage from fire, but portions were still intact. Most importantly, the jawbone and teeth were recovered. Dental records could be matched. There were also fragments of a skull with a bullet hole, and traces of cyanide were found in the tissue. The Soviet conclusion? This was Adolf Hitler. Case closed. Or so you'd think. But then something bizarre happened. At the Potsdam Conference in July 1945, when President Truman and Prime Minister Churchill asked Stalin directly about Hitler's fate, Stalin looked them in the eye and said, "Hitler escaped. He's probably in Spain or Argentina." Why would Stalin lie? Why would he deny having Hitler's body when his own investigators had confirmed it? The answer is pure Cold War politics. By keeping the West guessing, by suggesting Hitler might still be alive, Stalin could justify maintaining massive military forces in Germany. He could hunt for Nazi collaborators anywhere he wanted. It was a propaganda goldmine. And it worked. For decades, the world didn't know what to believe, and that uncertainty gave birth to some of the most persistent conspiracy theories in modern history. So what actual physical evidence do we have? Let's break it down, because this is crucial. First, the dental records. In 1945, Soviet investigators tracked down Hitler's personal dentist, Dr. Hugo Blaschke, and his dental technician, Käthe Häusermann. Under interrogation, they provided detailed records of Hitler's teeth, including bridges, crowns, and fillings. When compared to the jawbone found in the garden, it was a perfect match. We're talking about unique dental work that couldn't be faked. Second, the skull fragment. In 1946, Soviet troops returned to the bunker site and found a piece of skull with a bullet hole. For decades, this was presented as proof Hitler shot himself. It was even displayed in Moscow's Federal Archives. But here's the twist. In 2009, American researchers were finally allowed to examine that skull fragment. They ran DNA tests, and the results were shocking. The skull belonged to a woman, probably aged 20 to 40. It wasn't Hitler at all. This discovery sent shockwaves through the historical community. If the skull wasn't Hitler's, did that mean he escaped? Conspiracy theorists went wild. But here's what they missed. The jawbone, the teeth, those were never in question. Those were positively identified in 1945, confirmed by dental professionals, and they've remained in a Russian archive ever since. In 2017, Russian authorities finally allowed French researchers to examine them using modern forensic techniques. The verdict? A perfect match to Hitler's dental records. No doubt, no ambiguity. The teeth in that Moscow vault belonged to Adolf Hitler. And the presence of cyanide residue confirmed the method of death. So the physical evidence is actually rock solid. But if that's true, why did so many people believe Hitler escaped? To answer that, we need to look at the most famous conspiracy theory of all, the Argentina connection. Picture this. A secret U-boat slips out of a hidden Baltic port in the chaos of Berlin's fall. Inside, disguised and desperate, is Adolf Hitler. The submarine crosses the Atlantic, evading Allied patrols, and arrives on the coast of Argentina. Hitler disappears into a thriving community of German expatriates in the Andes Mountains, living out his days in a remote hotel, never to be seen again. Sounds like a Hollywood movie, right? But here's the thing, thousands of people believe this actually happened, and they have what they claim is evidence. Let's start with the submarines. On July 10, 1945, more than 2 months after Hitler's reported death, a German U-boat, U-530, surfaced off the coast of Argentina and surrendered. Then, on August 17th, another U-boat, U-977, did the same thing. Now, both submarine commanders were extensively interrogated. Both claimed they had simply been trying to evade capture after Germany's surrender. But conspiracy theorists asked, why Argentina? Why not surrender to the Allies in Europe? What were they really doing in South America? The answer, according to the theory, is that they were part of an escape convoy, that they had either transported Hitler himself or were part of a larger operation to evacuate Nazi leadership to a safe haven in the Southern Hemisphere. And Argentina wasn't a random choice. By 1945, Argentina had a large German community, particularly in the region of Bariloche in the Andes Mountains. The country was officially neutral during most of the war, and its government was sympathetic to fascism. For a fleeing Nazi, it was the perfect place to disappear. In fact, we know for certain that thousands of Nazis did exactly that. After the war, using networks called rat lines, often with help from sympathetic clergy and corrupt officials, an estimated 9,000 Nazi war criminals escaped to South America. Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust, lived in Argentina until Israeli agents kidnapped him in 1960. Joseph Mengele, the sadistic doctor of Auschwitz, spent decades in Brazil, dying there in 1979. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, lived comfortably in Bolivia. These weren't low-level bureaucrats. These were major war criminals, and they all got away. So if they could escape, why not Hitler himself? The logic seemed sound, the means existed, and the opportunity was there in those final chaotic days of April 1945. Then there's the FBI file. After the war, the FBI received hundreds of tips about Hitler sightings. The file grew to over 700 pages. Reports came in from Argentina, Colombia, Spain, even the United States. Each one was investigated. Each one claimed to have seen the Führer alive and well. And in Bariloche, there's a hotel, the Inalco House, that locals still call Hitler's Hotel. Rumors persist that Hitler lived there under an assumed name, that he fathered children, that he died peacefully in the 1960s. Photographs have surfaced over the years claiming to show an elderly Hitler in Argentina. Books have been written, documentaries have been made. The theory has taken on a life of its own. But is any of it true? Let's be fair and examine what makes the escape theory believable. Because it's not completely baseless. There are legitimate reasons people latched on to this idea. First, as I mentioned, the rat lines were real. The Odessa network, though its existence is debated, supposedly helped high-ranking Nazis escape. We know the Vatican and Red Cross were involved in some cases, issuing false documents. Escape routes through Spain, Portugal, and Italy to South America were well established. Second, the Soviet secrecy created a vacuum. They refused to share their autopsy reports. They wouldn't allow Western investigators to examine the evidence. And Stalin himself publicly claimed Hitler had escaped. When even the people who found the body won't confirm it, suspicion is natural. Third, there were credible reports of Nazi preparations for defeat. Swiss bank accounts were established. Gold and art were smuggled out of Germany. Submarines were sent on mysterious missions in the war's final days. It's clear that some Nazis were planning for life after the Reich. And fourth, Hitler's body was never displayed. There was no public funeral, no grave to visit, no closure. Without a body, without physical proof, the human mind fills in the blanks. It's basic psychology. Add it all up, and you can see why the escape theory gained traction. It wasn't just conspiracy nuts. Serious people wondered if maybe, just maybe, the greatest criminal in history had gotten away. The story is about to take another turn. But before we continue, if you're finding this investigation as fascinating as I am, do me a favor. Subscribe to Redline USA right now. We're not just scratching the surface here. We're going deep into the historical mysteries that deserve real answers. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Do you think Hitler escaped to Argentina? Or did he die in that bunker? I want to hear what you think. And turn on notifications, because we've got more explosive investigations coming your way. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's next. Now, let's look at the other conspiracy theories that emerged over the years. Argentina wasn't the only place people claimed Hitler escaped to. Oh no. As the decades passed, the theories got more and more elaborate. Some bordered on the absurd, but they all had their believers. Theory number 1, Antarctica. Yes, you heard that right. According to this theory, the Nazis had established a secret base in Antarctica called Neuschwabenland, or New Swabia. Hitler supposedly fled there and lived in an underground facility. Some versions even claim the base had advanced technology, flying saucers, anti-gravity devices, you name it. The U.S. Navy's Operation High Jump in 1946-47, a large-scale Antarctic expedition, was pointed to as proof that the Americans were hunting for this Nazi base. In reality, it was a scientific and military mapping mission. But facts rarely stop a good conspiracy theory. Theory number 2, Spain or Portugal. Some claimed Hitler escaped through the Alps to Spain, where Franco's fascist government would protect him. From there, he either stayed in a remote monastery or eventually moved to South America. This theory, at least, had the advantage of being geographically possible. Theory number 3, the body double theory. This one suggests that Hitler never died at all because the person in the bunker wasn't Hitler. He had used a look-alike, a body double, to fake his death while he escaped to safety. The problem? There's zero evidence Hitler ever used body doubles, and the dental records prove it was him. And then there are the really wild ones. Hitler living until the 1960s or even 1970s. Hitler escaping to South America and fathering children. Hitler living in a secret compound in the Amazon jungle. Each theory more outlandish than the last. But here's what's important to understand. These theories didn't emerge in a vacuum. They existed because of a perfect storm of secrecy, propaganda, and human psychology. So why did these conspiracy theories take hold so powerfully? Why do some people still believe them today? Let me break down the psychology and the politics. First, Soviet secrecy. By refusing to share evidence, and by Stalin actively lying about Hitler's fate, the Soviets created the perfect breeding ground for conspiracy theories. When the government won't tell you the truth, people assume the worst. Second, no closure. There was no body to view, no funeral, no grave. The lack of physical, visible proof left room for doubt. Humans need closure, especially when it comes to evil on Hitler's scale. We wanted him caught alive. We wanted a trial. We wanted to see justice done. A quiet suicide in a bunker felt anticlimactic. Third, the Cold War. Both the US and Soviet Union benefited from keeping the mystery alive. The Soviets could use it to justify occupation. The West could use it to maintain vigilance against Nazi resurgence. Fear is a powerful political tool. Fourth, real Nazi escapes. We know for a fact that major war criminals did escape. Eichmann, Mengele, Barbie, these men lived freely for years or decades. So the question became, if they got away, why not the biggest fish of all? And fifth, pop culture. Books, movies, television shows, they all kept the mystery alive. From The Boys from Brazil to Hunting Hitler on the History Channel, the idea of Hitler surviving became a cultural phenomenon. Fiction blurred with reality. But here's the critical question. What does the actual evidence say? Not theories, not speculation. What can we prove beyond reasonable doubt? That's what we need to examine next. Let's dismantle the escape theories piece by piece, using logic, evidence, and timeline analysis. Because when you actually examine them closely, they fall apart. Fatal flaw number 1, the timeline. By April 30th, 1945, Berlin was completely surrounded by Soviet forces. The Red Army had encircled the city. Every road, every bridge, every escape route was either destroyed or under Soviet control. The idea that Hitler could have just slipped out through a tunnel or been smuggled to an airport is fantasy. The Führerbunker itself was under constant artillery bombardment. Soviet troops were literally blocks away. The final battle for the Reich Chancellery was happening above ground. How exactly would Hitler, one of the most recognizable faces in the world, have escaped through enemy lines? Fatal flaw number 2, no documentary evidence. We have extensive Nazi records, meticulous, obsessive records. Hitler's daily schedule was documented, his movements were logged, communications were recorded. But there is not a single piece of documentary evidence, not one order, one memo, one radio message, indicating an escape plan was ever prepared. Compare this to the rat lines that helped other Nazis escape. We have documents, testimonies, paper trails. For Hitler, nothing, because there was no plan. Fatal flaw number 3, Hitler's physical and mental state. By April 1945, Hitler was a shell of himself. He had severe Parkinson's disease. His left hand shook uncontrollably. He could barely walk. He was taking cocktails of drugs, including methamphetamine. His health was completely broken. This was not a man capable of undertaking a dangerous escape mission. This was not a man who could hide in a submarine for weeks or trek through the Alps. He could barely make it up a flight of stairs. Fatal flaw number 4, Hitler's psychology. Everything we know about Hitler's personality argues against escape. He was obsessed with Wagnerian opera, particularly Götterdämmerung, the Twilight of the Gods. He saw himself as a mythic figure who would go down in apocalyptic glory, not as a coward who ran away. Hitler had spent months ranting about treachery and cowardice. He had ordered the execution of officers who suggested retreat. His entire ideology was built on the idea of fighting to the death. The idea that this man would suddenly abandon everything and flee is psychologically implausible. Fatal flaw number 5, multiple independent witnesses. Hitler's death wasn't witnessed by one person. It wasn't a rumor. At least a dozen people in that bunker confirmed the suicide. These weren't all fanatical Nazis who would lie for him. After Germany's surrender, many cooperated with Allied investigators. Their testimonies, while varying in minor details, all agreed on the core facts. And here's the critical point. None of them, even under interrogation, ever suggested Hitler had escaped. If there had been a conspiracy, if it had been a cover-up, someone would have talked. Someone always talks. So when you examine the escape theories critically, they don't just have problems, they have fatal, insurmountable problems. But if that's the case, what about those photographs of Hitler in Argentina? What about the FBI files? Let me address those.
The photographs have all been debunked. Facial recognition analysis shows they're not Hitler.
The FBI files? Every single lead was investigated and found to be false. Every single one. People saw what they wanted to see, or they were attention seekers, or they were simply mistaken. The escape theories are compelling stories, but that's all they are, stories.
Now let's talk about modern science.
Because in 2017, something happened that should have put all the conspiracy theories to rest forever. For decades, the Soviet Union and later Russia kept Hitler's supposed remains under lock and key. Researchers were rarely allowed access. But in 2017, Russian authorities finally permitted a team of French researchers, including a forensic pathologist, to examine the jawbone and teeth fragments held in Moscow's federal archives. The team was led by Professor Philippe Charlier, one of France's leading forensic experts. He had previously worked on identifying the remains of historical figures like Richard the Lionheart and Joan of Arc. If anyone could verify whether these remains were authentic, it was him. The researchers examined the teeth under microscope. They analyzed the dental work, the bridges, the crowns, the fillings. They compared everything to Hitler's known dental records, which had been documented by his dentist in meticulous detail. The conclusion? A perfect match. The jawbone and teeth belonged to Adolf Hitler. No doubt, no ambiguity. The dental work was unique. It included a specific bridge design that was uncommon for the time, and fillings in a pattern that matched exactly. But they went further. They found traces of cyanide compounds on the teeth. This confirmed the eyewitness accounts that Hitler had bitten down on a cyanide capsule. They also found no traces of gunpowder residue in the mouth, which has led some experts to now believe Hitler may have died primarily from cyanide, not the gunshot. But regardless of the exact method, the forensic evidence is conclusive. These remains are Hitler's. Modern science has confirmed what the Soviets knew in 1945. There's also the matter of what happened to the rest of Hitler's remains. The skull fragment we talked about earlier, that was fake. But the bulk of the bodies, Hitler's and Eva Braun's, were actually buried and reburied multiple times by Soviet intelligence. They were initially buried in a forest near Berlin, then moved to Magdeburg, Germany, where they remained hidden until 1970. That year, the KGB decided the burial site was too risky. East Germany was planning construction in the area, and they feared the graves would be discovered and become a neo-Nazi shrine. So on April 4th, 1970, the KGB dug up the remains, burned them completely, crushed the ashes, and scattered them in the Biederitz River near Magdeburg. The only things they kept were the jawbone fragments and teeth, which remain in Moscow to this day. So there is no grave, there is no body. Hitler quite literally ceased to exist, scattered in a river in East Germany. It's a fitting end in a way. No monument, no shrine, no place for his followers to gather. Just nothing. So here's what actually happened, based on all available evidence, forensic analysis, and historical documentation. On April 30th, 1945, around 3:30 p.m., Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun retreated to their private quarters in the Führerbunker. Hitler likely bit down on the cyanide capsule and simultaneously shot himself in the right temple with his Walther PPK pistol. Eva Braun took cyanide only. Their bodies were carried outside by Hitler's staff, placed in a shell crater in the Reich Chancellery Garden, doused with approximately 200 liters of gasoline, and set on fire. The burning continued for several hours, but due to ongoing Soviet shelling and limited fuel, the bodies were not completely cremated. On May 2nd, Soviet troops discovered the partially burned remains and transported them for identification. A secret autopsy on May 8th confirmed the identity through dental records. The remains were buried secretly, moved multiple times, and ultimately destroyed in 1970. The escape theories emerged because of Soviet secrecy, Stalin's lies, Cold War politics, and the human need for closure. But they were never supported by evidence. The forensic proof is overwhelming. The documentary record is clear. The eyewitness testimony is consistent. Adolf Hitler died on April 30th, 1945, in Berlin. He did not escape to Argentina. He did not flee to Antarctica. He did not live out his days in hiding. He died exactly when and where history records, in a bunker beneath the burning ruins of his failed empire. That's the truth. Not a theory, not speculation. The truth.
So why does this matter? Why are we still talking about Hitler's death 80 years later?
It's because the conspiracy theories around his fate represent something larger: the danger of misinformation and the importance of evidence. When we allow myths and conspiracies to replace documented facts, we do a disservice to history and to the victims of Nazi atrocities. 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. Millions more, Romani people, disabled individuals, political prisoners, LGBTQ people, Soviet POWs, were systematically killed. Those victims deserve the truth. They deserve for us to accurately record what happened, who was responsible, and how it ended. When we entertain fantasies about Hitler escaping, we diminish the reality of his crimes and the finality of his defeat.
And yes, real Nazi war criminals did escape. Eichmann lived in Argentina until 1960.
Mengele died in Brazil in 1979, never facing justice. Klaus Barbie lived comfortably in Bolivia. These men should have been caught. They should have been tried. That's a stain on post-war justice that we must acknowledge. But Hitler didn't escape. He died, as history records, and we need to be clear about that. Because in an age of misinformation, facts matter. Evidence matters. Truth matters.
The truth is often stranger than fiction, but it's always worth pursuing.
We've examined the evidence, debunked the myths, and arrived at the facts. Adolf Hitler died in his bunker on April 30th, 1945. The mystery, while compelling, has been solved. If you appreciate this kind of deep investigation into history's greatest mysteries, subscribe to Redline USA right now. We're committed to bringing you the truth, no matter where it leads. Hit that subscribe button, click the bell icon, and join our community of truth seekers. Drop a comment below and tell me, what historical mystery should we investigate next? What story do you want us to uncover? Next time on Redline USA, we're diving into another dark chapter of World War II, Unit 731, Japan's secret biological warfare program that conducted horrific human experiments. It's a story that will shock you. You won't want to miss it. Until